Okay, ready to go?
Yes, you are live now.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone, on this freezing cold Sydney winter evening. We are here to talk about students sitting for the 2023 Selective High School Writing Test. And we're going to analyse some of the things that were appropriate to the 2022 test. Of course, we don't know what the 2023 prompt will be, but we are seeing a pattern from 21 and 22 that will help us think through the kind of general strategies that we might use as we approach the 2023 writing task. Now, as we work through this will be just a presentation. Unfortunately, with this many people involved, it's not possible to make it interactive. So unfortunately, you will be rather passive participants and you'll have to put up with me for the evening. If you do have some questions, you can send them to David and he will respond to them. But during the presentation, I won't be able to respond to them. We would ask people to limit questions or comments to only things that are very relevant. And if you are a student with us this afternoon, that's lovely. We love having our kids on board, and a special hello to any of my students who are from my Saturday class. A special hello to those people. But we do ask that your comments or questions are actually relevant to the presentation. Okay, let's go and investigate the writing task for Selective High School. Okay, so when we sit this task, when we sit this test, the students will be asked to write about a topic, and they'll be given a small set of instructions that will guide them towards the topic and may give them some guidance towards the kind of writing that they will be expected to produce. One of the key things that will be assessed is creativity of ideas, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more as we work through the presentation. But ideas are great and they sit within our heads. Of course, the difficult part probably is getting those ideas down effectively onto a piece of paper for the purpose that you are writing and the audience, which unfortunately is the marker. It's critical that students have really high-level skills in grammar, punctuation, spelling, and vocabulary. These are what we might describe as the baseline technical aspects of any piece of writing, regardless of the prompt or even regardless of the situation you're writing in. But in a test situation, these underlying technical skills have to be right up there at almost perfection level. Now, students who do not address the topic in their writing, regardless of how creative or exciting the piece of writing is, will receive low marks. And if you think about it, this is obviously put in place to take away the opportunity for students to pre-prepare a text, learn it, and just regurgitate it according, when they get into the test. That would be lovely if that opportunity existed. But obviously, if you don't stay on topic and you don't stay on task, you just reproduce a piece of writing that you already had, you're not going to achieve a very good score. However, having said that, there are lots and lots of ways that students can prepare and have a whole battery of skills ready to apply to the topic, although one of those is not pre-preparing a task and having it ready just to knock out on the test day. Well, what do we know? We know we have 30 minutes writing time, and we know that the test designers describe the task as an open response. And what that generally means is that they will not necessarily specify the type of writing that they want the students to do. Now, often when students are learning to write or doing writing tasks in school or even at college, they are instructed to write a narrative or write an argument. It's very unlikely that that level of specificity will come with the test, and that's why they're describing it as an open response, because they are asking students to consider the type of writing that they will produce. The prompt will guide them or steer them towards a particular type of writing, and this is probably the hardest bit for our students. This is you. A lot of the time when students produce pieces of writing in their everyday school or even college life, the text does not really need to stand alone. And what we mean by that is the text has to make sense to a completely remote audience. The marker has no relationship with you at all or with your student. And that's not normal for our kids, because normally our kids know the teacher, they know the person that will be assessing their piece of writing, and often there's interaction between the marker and the student. So, little things like, what did you mean here? Or do you think you've left a word out here? Or, I think there's some missing punctuation here. And the student has the opportunity to correct or edit the piece of writing, which is wonderful, but doesn't happen in a test. So you have to put yourself in a situation that all you really are when you are participating in this test is just a number on a screen. And your text will come up on the screen and the marker will assess it with absolutely no knowledge of who you are and really no real interest in who you are. They're only interested in applying the marking criteria to your text. Okay, so let's look at generally what are we aiming for. It doesn't matter what the prompt is. These are the features that we should try and consider, or not just consider, that we should be aware that we need to put into any piece of writing. So it needs to be a skillful response, which is accomplishing the purpose. Simply, this is what I plan to write for this purpose, and now I've got to make sure that what I do put on the page achieves that purpose. Texts that need to be coherent and well-structured throughout, including effective connections and transitions. Now, well-structured means writing in paragraphs generally, organized paragraphs, and the connections and transitions between those paragraphs need to be fluid, okay? Not clunky. For instance, paragraphs that begin with firstly, secondly, nextly, that's clunky, okay? The marker can count. They know that they're up to the second paragraph. You don't need to tell them. That those kinds of connections are clunky and not terribly effective. The transitions between sentences and between paragraphs should be clear and fluid, not jumpy and clunky. Ideas that are developed logically, coherently, and effectively. We have to have those ideas to begin with. This sounds really obvious that your idea has to be developed logically and coherently. But when we're writing under pressure, our brain is often racing a lot further ahead than where our pen or our keyboard is up to. So we have to make sure that what's logical to us in our head actually makes sense to someone who can't see inside our head and work out what we meant to say. So what we put on the page has to connect, has to come out in a logical and coherent way so it makes sense and it holds together effectively. And whatever ideas we're doing, we need to make sure that it has supporting details, which might be examples, might be elaboration, and that the whole thing, the whole piece of text, hangs together around one main idea or central idea that we're developing consistently across the paragraphs. To create these paragraphs, we need a set of well-chosen sentences. Now, I'm pretty sure that any students listening will go, oh, I can write a sentence. And of course you can. But we have to focus on making sure we've got a variety of well-structured sentences. Remembering in this text, you're writing somewhere around about 6 to 7 paragraphs is usually a good general aiming point. Every single sentence that makes up those paragraphs has to be of a high standard. This is not a novel. There's no space for you to have a few ordinary quality sentences thrown in amongst mostly good quality ones. They all have to be of a very high standard. Then what makes up the sentences? Well, words and phrases, obviously. Okay, so these words and phrases have to be chosen strategically and precisely. Okay, every single word, little tiny transition words like prepositions and conjunctions, ones we don't even think about when we're pulling our ideas together. Every single word has to work with every other word to create the phrases, to create the clauses, to create the sentences, to create the paragraphs. It's a set of building blocks. And then, as we said previously, spelling, grammar, punctuation, language use has to be spot on. Okay. And, you know, I can hear kids asking questions in the background like, oh, what if it's a really hard word and I can't spell it? Well, yes, there is some facility if you're attempting an extremely difficult word and the marker can see that what word you're attempting, it's even though the spelling isn't 100% accurate, you will still get the marks for the vocabulary and you won't get penalised for poor spelling. But if you accidentally leave a letter off the end of a word, or you forget that apostrophe in its because you used the wrong its, you will get penalised. Okay, we can't make that standard of mistake. Okay, so the piece of writing has to be effective for purpose and audience. Now, students hear these terms all the time in relation to writing. Okay, what are we talking about? Well, your purpose is your reason or your intent in your writing. Why are you writing this? Not what are you writing about? Why are you writing it? Your purpose is pretty clear. Your purpose is to achieve the maximum possible score that you can. Okay? Your audience is absolutely obvious as well. Your audience, you need an audience in mind when you're creating the piece of text. So this will be a fictional audience that you're writing for. But actually, your audience is the marker who is going to judge your piece of work. In some writing tasks, the purpose may be given, but it's more than likely that the prompt will suggest the purpose rather than the purpose being actually given. And as we said earlier, that's not often what students are used to. They are often used to being told exactly what purpose for writing they should be achieving. Write a narrative, write a description, write an argument. It's less likely in this form of test that they will be given that exact purpose. So when they see the prompt, these are some things they might like to think about that they're trying to achieve, that their purpose might be. So are they trying to intrigue or excite or inspire or even alarm the reader? Are they trying to persuade the reader? Persuade the reader what? To change their ideas, to change their thinking, to take an action, or simply just to take your side, to agree with you in your piece of writing? Is our purpose to tell what something looks like, sounds like, feels like? Well, that's descriptive writing. And it's pretty likely that whatever kind of writing you are attempting in this test, there will be some opportunity for descriptive elements to be in there. It's pretty unlikely that the entire text would be description, because description is more like a technique that you might be using to achieve some of your other purpose. You might need to explain something. That's a purpose for writing. But we might be explaining something within the context of persuading. Or we might be explaining something as we try to relate an experience. So an explanation is a purpose for writing of itself, but it can also be a component of other types of writing. We might be trying to amuse. Now, I'll just put a little caveat on that one, even though I've said down here that you can make parts of a text create different purposes, and you can use different techniques to create your purpose. The amusing one is a little bit wobbly because it's pretty hard to be funny. Most of us think we're highly amusing most of the time. In fact, unfortunately, we're not. And writing good quality humorous text is actually quite difficult to do. So it's probably something you shouldn't attempt unless you've had a fair bit of feedback from somebody who knows what they're talking about, that tells you that you really actually can achieve humor. Of course, you'll be highly rewarded if you use humor effectively. However, if it's pretty bland and boring, it'll fall flat. Okay. So if it's a narrative or creative piece, it might follow a pretty standard structure. And what I'd like to do with this is introduce as a standard structure, and then possibly suggest, let's mess with it. So a standard narrative creative text structure that students are usually taught at this level begins with what we describe as the status quo, which is simply the situation that the protagonist or main character is in as the text opens. It's sometimes described as situation normal. In other words, the protagonist or main character is in a situation that isn't really causing them any difficulties or problems or challenges. Then we get what's described as a catalyst incident, where this is a signal to the marker, something's about to change, and our protagonist or main character is not going to be able to remain in situation normal. Then we get these events which sort of go up the pyramid, which are called the rising action. And that just means our protagonist is fluffing about attempting to solve the problem or situation that was created by the catalyst incident that started the problem rolling. And the number of situations or events or challenges that the protagonist faces as they climb up this mountain can be variable, but in a 30-minute writing task, you've got to manage this rising action section pretty carefully, because otherwise you'll end up in with your protagonist in a situation where they climbed the mountain, but they haven't been able to get down the other side because you've run out of time. Then we get to this thing which is commonly known as a resolution, and I've described it here as a resolution, although I personally find this nomenclature a bit strange. because things are rarely resolved. Well, they are in fairy tales, but we're writing at a level of sophistication beyond a fairy tale. So what we're looking for here is some kind of a point in the narrative where the main problem that the narrator or the protagonist or the main character has kind of got to a point where they've reached some sort of resolution. Students who are in my class know that I don't like this word, and I prefer the word endpoint, which we explore a little bit more. But generally, we're looking at the point where the protagonist either solves a problem and gets to back to situation normal, or doesn't get what they want. So we have an unhappy ending, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, protagonists don't always solve the problem, but they get to some sort of a point where the problem ends, even if it isn't solved to their satisfaction. Or possibly they don't solve the problem to their satisfaction, but they work out a way to live with that, or they get to a different point and they think, oh, well, that's not so bad after all. Okay, so we've got through this standard structure. And as students get better and better at working with this standard structure and getting to create a text that follows this structure pretty closely, and they can do that in a 30-minute writing task, the next step is to mess with the structure, because what you don't want is a piece of writing that looks pretty formulaic like everybody else's. So we've got to start with the basic structure, and then we've got to get some strategies in place to manipulate it so it's not like everybody else's piece of writing. Okay, so let's talk about ideas, because we said we would get to the 2022 prompt, and ideas are kind of what's going to lead us to that prompt. So our purpose, our challenge, is to select, develop, and organize ideas, and then get them down onto a piece of paper so that the fabulous ideas in our head make sense to someone on a piece of text. How do we select our ideas? We think about, what can I write about? And then hopefully you'll have a lot of ideas swimming around in your head. Then from that group of ideas, you might go, well, what should I write about? And hopefully that will help you eliminate some of them, because they might be pretty obvious, or they might be fabulous ideas, but you can't get them done in a 30-minute writing task. And finally, you'll get to what will I write about, and that will be your idea. And then you have to think about that idea, and you have to think, how do I develop it? Okay. And this is where we work on elaborating and expanding ideas, because we're going to have one big fat idea that's called the what will I write about it idea. And to make that idea up, we're going to have some small, meaty, but not quite as chunky ideas that come together to create the large idea. So our ideas need to be substantial and robust so they can be developed. A small, skinny idea might make a fabulous paragraph, but it won't make a 30-minute, 6 to 7 paragraph writing task. So it has to be a fairly chunky, meaty idea, but not so large that it requires an entire novel to develop it, because you've only got a 30-minute writing time. And this is probably our biggest challenge. Cliche ideas should be avoided. And I would love $1 for every child when I put a prompt in front of them and they're going, oh, I know, there's going to be this really mean kid who's a bully, and they're going to get their just desserts because the nice kid will somehow defeat them. And I just cringe, because there are some ideas and themes that are just so cliched that you can just imagine the poor marker who has read 10, 12, 15 scripts that day about bullying, just rolling their eyes when another one pops up on the screen. So we really have to push our kids to think, okay, what's a really cliched idea? And it might be the first one that pops into my head, but I've got to pop that one straight back out again because I should immediately be getting an alarm bell. Oh, no, that's a bit obvious and cliched. I need to come up with something a little bit more creative. Okay, so what elements do I need to develop my ideas? This should be already in our students' head. So if it's a persuasive text, we need a contention, an argument. We need arguments that support and develop our contention. We need some form of evidence or examples or elaboration that goes with each argument. If it's a narrative creative task, it'll need a narrator, which may be first or third person. I don't think there's necessarily a preference. It will depend on the prompt and what students do better. We'll need characters, we'll need events, something has to happen, and a setting. Okay, pretty basic. And regardless of whether it's creative or narrative, it will need a theme. It may need some description. Description is pretty generic across both types of texts, and it will need a start and some sort of conclusion, end point, resolution, sum up, whatever you might want to call it. So back to our ideas and how they fit together with those elements. So the creation of the idea refers to originality and creativity. And can I say the students will not have any original ideas? Okay. If your student is able to come up with a narrative idea that is completely original, they should already be doing an advanced writers course at Harvard University, because they won't come up with an original idea, and nor should they be expected to. But what they should be coming up with is a creative or less common approach to a less original idea. Okay. So then once they've got their big idea, let's say, for an example, their idea is that they're going to write a creative piece of writing where a character is going on a journey, and the purpose of that journey is to find something special or important. Okay, like I said, this is not original. It's the way that the students come up with creative approaches to that idea. Then they've got to think about the deliberate inclusion or omission of ideas, because we could put many, 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 many supporting ideas into that notion of, here's my character, they're on a journey because they're seeking something or they're locating something. So am I going to write a lot of stuff about the mode of transport that they use to go on this journey? Or am I going to write a lot of stuff about different characters they meet along the way on the journey? Or are they going to be faced with a whole lot of challenges on this journey, which might come from bad weather or difficult terrain they have to cross? Or are they going to face a challenge from somebody who misleads them or tricks them or dupes them or tries to harm them? Selection of ideas. There's an infinite number of ideas we could put into our text of our character on our journey. Selecting the right ones to create a cohesive piece of text is the trick, of course. So then I've got my underpinning ideas, the ones that go into my original my creative idea. And then I've got to craft them. So I've got to construct and develop these ideas and organize them to make them logical and cohesive, so that it's clear to somebody what's going on. That's basically it, okay? And probably one of the key things to do is to recognize that a few well-chosen supporting ideas in your selection will be far less problematic than lots and lots of little bitsy ideas, one after the other. Okay. Okay. So our 2022 prompt was about into the future. That kind of creates our theme for us. It doesn't help us a great deal because the future is an enormous concept. So we see this future and all kinds of exciting technology and advancements and human development and all kinds of things might jump into our head. Oh, I'm going to write about augmented reality, and oh, I'm going to put in stuff about this and all this stuff. Calm down. We've got to work out what's achievable in a 30-minute writing task. So focus on the key information in the prompt. This was what we got. It's a date. Okay, so we're 75, 80 years into the future. And we got this. Today the house robot woke me, so I'm the narrator, I'm the main character, up with his singing, and I remembered that. You'll notice that the purpose for writing wasn't there. Write a narrative, write this. It was a diary entry. That's not a purpose, it's a form. And then you got this little suggestion. You could incorporate travel, futuristic technology, home and social life. You could. Should you? And more importantly, should you try and do all of them? And I can tell you right now, the answer is no. You should not do all of them, because you'll end up with a bitsy, underdeveloped, disconnected piece of writing in an attempt to do 3 things poorly rather than do 1 or at the most 2 things well. So the future. This theme supports creative ideas, but they need to be manageable. One of the challenges with this particular text is not so much that kids are unlikely to sit there blankly going, I've got no ideas, rather than more than likely their heads will be flooding with everything they've ever seen, from any YouTube video to any Marvel comic to all kinds of stuff that might support them to come up with ideas about the future. Now, the future's unknown, which is interesting because you can't be wrong in the sense, but you need to put some parameters on what you're thinking about the future might be. Of course, you might include inventions or technology that could be imagined to have been invented and be part of everyday life by the time we reach 2099. But I would advise strongly about trying to create a totally different world, because in this world in 2019, there are still humans and they're writing diaries. We know that from the prompt. So this does not suggest, for instance, what might students love to write about these days, which is the so-called dystopian world, where everything has collapsed, the world is in total crisis, the human race has been diminished to being nothing but ragged animals wandering around with no purpose in life. That world is extremely difficult to manage credibly and cohesively. And it's also unlikely that somebody living in that world would be taking the time to sit down and write about a robot that sang to them in the morning. If your basic purpose in life is to survive day by day in some really difficult, dreadful situation, singing robots are probably not going to be a part of that world. So I would advise about going too far away from the world that we know now. But of course, you've got to drag in some aspects of the future. And this is where the creativity of ideas comes in. So here we go. Dear diary, I woke up to my house robot singing loudly. Then I remembered. If the person woke up, that signals the beginning of the day. So does that suggest a chronological order? Or is that suggesting that most kids will do a chronological order? Is there another approach I could take that still fits the prompt? I remembered. Does that remembered allow the writer to move to a different point in time? So although it's 2099 and I've got a singing robot, can I go back in time and write about a memory or something that I've learned about? Because that way I can take my diary entry back to a world that I'm more familiar with, the one I live in now, rather than trying to set my text entirely in the future. These are possibilities, not recommendations, but they are taking you into different approaches to the prompt. Okay. So if it's a diary, we need to observe the expected features of a diary entry. Well, that's not particularly hard to do. We need to consider the audience. And this is a little bit of a challenge with a diary entry because most diary entries are for a very personal audience. The notion of creating a diary is that it's quite personal and isn't often meant to be read by others. So which means we need to consider voice. The voice is a person like yourself, and you are writing to yourself, essentially. Now, if we think about our own personal writing and how we approach it, we might write notes to ourselves in a series of dot points and keywords. That makes sense to us. But of course, that's not going to enable us to demonstrate a range of writing techniques that are going to get us marks in a test. So we have to really consider that our diary entry is actually going to be quite a sophisticated piece of writing, not just a series of little personal notes that we might jot down to ourselves. What type of text should we write? Now, don't tell me that the type of text is a diary entry, because that's not a text type. It's a form of writing. And last year, the form was a newspaper report. This year, it's a diary entry. They're actually very similar. Not in the way that you might structure them, but in the opportunities they offer you to choose the type of writing that you might do. So in a diary entry, you might be recounting, you might be narrating. These are your types of text, but a hybrid text is probably most likely. And that would mean it was including some recount of events and some creative narrative features as well. Think about what response you want the reader to have to your piece of writing. Do you want the reader at the end of reading your diary entry to have a detailed understanding of just one event or situation that you described, narrated, recounted in your diary entry? Do you want the reader to have a good understanding of you, the narrator? Do you want to include personal details in your diary entry that give an insight into you? Because essentially you're the character, okay? And of course, the you that is the diary entry writer is not necessarily you with your own personality and situation. It's the character that you are creating as yourself. So, for instance, you might make comments like, I'm sick of my mum making me take protein pills every day. They give me tummy aches. Do you want the reader to form an opinion about an event or situation? So do you want them to think, oh, I've just created this diary entry. Do I want my reader to form an opinion about the event or situation that I narrated or recounted? Okay. Do I want them to think, oh, that was unfair? Or, oh, I don't agree with that. These are possibilities. We certainly aren't going to try and do all of these. Do you want the reader to have an emotional response to the event or experience or situation that you described, narrated, recounted? A response might be, wow, that sounds great. I wish I could have a go at that. Or, ooh, I'm glad I don't live in 2099. That sounds horrid. All right. Or do you want to attract the reader's attention to a theme or a message? For instance, you might use your diary entry to create a message around the fact that technology is now so invasive in the lives of people in 2099 that they've turned into inactive vegetables or whatever. You're not going to try and create all these responses in your reader, but you might try and create one or two. So here are some possible responses to our prompt. Now, these were the suggestions on the prompt. Could you use these? Well, you could. You probably wouldn't want to use them all. In fact, as we said before, you wouldn't. It'd be too much. So maybe you write a diary entry about an exciting day you had traveling in a futuristic place or environment in your family's personal aero bat transporter. Okay. This is just like a recount of a great day you had that you would do in 2023. You just have to put it into a futuristic place. Your form of transport is not the family car or the train or whatever. So you bring the futuristic elements in, but it may be a similar experience to what a child your age could have in 2020 or 23, 22. You might write about home or social life, the day all the robots in our house malfunctioned and I had to do all these things for myself and I absolutely struggled. I had to find my own clothing. I don't know how to do that. The robot gets my clothes out every morning for me. And then Mum said there was no breakfast on the table because the breakfast robot had malfunctioned and accidentally produced only dog food this morning. Now what do we do? Family's completely lost, can't do anything. Get a bowl of cereal for ourselves. Don't know how to do that. Maybe it was your birthday. Okay, so you see how we're bringing a very familiar context from 2023 into our diary entry of the future. And you got your first personal bot. You reached the age of 11 or 10 or whatever, and yay, this was a really exciting day because you'd been promised your own personal robot, and this was really exciting and everything was going well until the house robot got really jealous and upset. And there was a bit of a clash between these two robots, a clash of personalities or whatever. This is just a standard narrative theme that you could use anywhere, but you're bringing a futuristic context to it. So when you see the prompt, you need to focus on some keywords to form up your ideas. And we did that in those examples that we had a look at then. But it's really worth taking a couple of minutes out of the writing time to form your ideas really carefully. And what I think you should do is try to see if your big idea, the ones that you're going to put the supporting ideas under, if you can say it to yourself in a single sentence. And then you think, okay, that's achievable in a 30-minute writing task. I know what I want my reader to think, my marker. I know what type of writing I'm going to do. I know what my big idea is. And I've got a quick paragraph plan of my small ideas that are going to build my big idea. You don't have to write this down. You can. But if it's in your head, you'll start writing with a clear direction and you'll know you're on track to achieve a good task. Unfortunately, when you see the prompt, your brain starts running at 3,000 miles an hour, which is not bad for the future. It probably should be. However, you don't want to start writing if all you've got is some fuzzy idea in your head that's going to start your text, but you've got no idea how it's going to develop beyond that, and you're going to make it up as you go along, because you're going to end up with an incoherent, disconnected piece of text, and you will not do well. Okay. Now, a couple of other possible futuristic type tasks, responses to the text you could have. Maybe it was an exciting day in your family. You woke up to the singing robot and he was singing the Welcome Home song. Why was he singing? He, she, it was singing the Welcome Home song because a family member of yours is just returning from 12 months on Mars. Okay, they've been up there on the Earth space station doing some experiments, and they're finally coming home. Now, I can hear all my technologically and scientifically aware students going, yeah, but it takes 30 years to get to Mars. We can bend the truth a little bit in this narrative context. We're in 2099, and the trip back only actually took 6 weeks or something. You don't even need to put those kinds of details in. It was a dull day that I'm writing about because my virtual teacher had malfunctioned, and we had a substitute teacher who actually sounded like a robot. Oh, how 2050 is that? It's like when my mother was at school. What a disaster. Okay, but this is one for some of our students who might have seen that prompt and just gone, I don't know anything about the future. I can't think of anything about the future. I never write futuristic type of texts. I'm quite a good writer, but this theme of the future, I'm not getting anything. Waking up to a singing robot, oh, what do I write about? I've got no idea. Take the prompt and make it work for something that you're good at. Here's an example. Dear Diary, yesterday I woke up to the singing robot, blah, 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 turned the robot off because Grandma hates the singing robot, and today I'm celebrating Grandma's 90th birthday. So you've got to link it into the prompt. So we'll just get rid of the singing robot. We'll put him in the cupboard, her in the cupboard, because Grandma's coming over to celebrate her 90th birthday. And Grandma told me that what she really wanted to do on her 90th birthday was go on a walk in a forest. That's how she'd like to celebrate someone. We thought it was a bit of a boring thing to do, but we thought, yes, why not? It's Grandma's birthday. It's her choice. So we've set the context. Nothing very futuristic so far. We're going for a walk in a forest. And then we're going to go back in time. Because when Grandma was a girl, not much older than me, this is what she told me about. Humans had almost destroyed the planet. with something Gran called climate change. According to Gran, it was a pretty awful situation back there in the 2020s when Gran was a girl. And then, of course, you could relate how Gran said that the world came together and we solved this dreadful problem. And now, look, here we are in this beautiful forest going for walks, but so on. Okay, so you're pulling yourself back into a familiar context. You're really pulling yourself back into the present or just the very near future, because you can't come up with any ideas about what life might be, really project what life might be like in 2099. And really, this will work beautifully. Okay, you're staying within the boundaries of the prompt, you're doing a diary entry, but you're making your ideas work as something that you can manage, rather than forcing out something silly because you don't have any good ideas about life in 2099. Okay. Voice. This is really important in this type of writing. Your voice is how the narrator or the character or the person producing the diary entry sounds to the reader. So it should be distinct and really communicatively effective. Your voice is in a diary entry is how your personality is going to shine through to the marker. And when I say your personality, I don't mean your real personality. I mean the personality of the diary writer. So your character, the diary writer, must match their voice. A diary entry should give a strong insight into the creator of the diary entry through their voice. So we assumed in this text that the narrator, the diary entry creator, was a child of similar age to yourself, okay? But if you're in another context, you were writing from the perspective of a very wealthy older man or a busy, overworked mother or an ordinary 11-year-old girl, the voice is going to be different, okay? So let's look at how we do this. The phrases and style of speech, whether it's direct or reported, and in a diary entry, it's going to be mainly reported speech. I had a conversation with Grandma and we talked about. You've got to consciously develop your diary writer's personal style of communicating. And that might mean a little bit of use of slang, a bit of use of idiomatic language, etc. This gives a richness and depth to your character and gives them a voice. But it should not dominate your piece of writing. It should be little tiny bits woven in to give a little insight into your character and make them feel genuine and alive. Stay away from 2023 stuff like OMG and BFF. That's so 2023. Do you think people will be talking like that in 2099? No. Your purpose here is not to prove that you're an expert in 2022 teenage slang. Your purpose is to have a voice that makes your diary writer sound real. Okay. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on literary devices because I think most kids know what these are, so I'll go over them fairly quickly. These may be called narrative devices or literary techniques. It doesn't really matter what you label them as. But even if it's a diary entry, you've got to find a way to weave some of these devices into your piece of writing, because this is what powerful writing includes, okay? So you've got to think about the way you combine your words and phrases to have the maximum impact on the marker, okay? You can learn narrative techniques or devices. You'll probably already know quite a few. Knowing them and weaving them skillfully to develop your ideas into a piece of writing, there's a bit of a gap there, okay? I could learn a difficult mathematical formula and I could recite it and tell you exactly what it is. I probably couldn't apply it. That's the leap we've got to get over. So what devices could you use in this kind of text? Sensory details and images. Almost certainly you could have included these in a diary entry, okay? So something about images that help the reader create a mental image of this world that you're trying to take them into in 2099, okay? Description that touches on the senses, and of course most description that students write is visual, okay? Try to bring in some of your other senses as well. So the singing robot, when I shot it a meaningful glare, it flipped over to my favorite tune, and its titanium lungs came out of it, which from its titanium lungs came a sound which was clear and sound and loud and harmonious. Okay, so that was using the robot prompt from the beginning. You could use forward and backward flashes in a diary entry like this, because diary entries are centered on a particular point in time when the entry is being made, but the content doesn't have to stay on the day of the 19th of July 2099. Perhaps your diary entry is about the fact that on that date in July in 2099, it's just 1 week to go until, you know, project into the future some very exciting, important event that your diary writer is looking forward to. Or go back in time to another event that occurred earlier in the life or family situation or whatever of the diary creator. And of course, we can use metaphors, similes, and so on, but they've got to be used strategically and effectively. Don't just, you know, put them in there because you know what a metaphor is or you know what a simile is. You're better off creating a piece of writing that doesn't include either, but uses other narrative devices and techniques that you can use effectively. Of course, use them if you've come to a point in your text where this is just the perfect way to get your image or your description across. But metaphors and similes of themselves are not going to get you marks. They have to be used effectively. Okay, I'm going to just skip to this one. I'm very conscious of time, and I'm very aware that we have very little time left. So this is an example of the standard that we should be aiming for. For the first time since the accident, I returned to the beach. It's the 19th of July, 2099. Immediately, the image of Dad and I wading knee-deep in the icy surf, kicking up the surface so the droplets glimmered like diamonds in the sunlight, flooded back. We were floating on our backs and staring. Can you see the beautiful use of language, the excellent construction of sentences, the lovely imagery that's been created as the narrator, the diary writer? My earliest memories are filled with images of my father doing this and so on. It was the 5th anniversary of the accident. So now we're pulling it back to a diary entry. We've shown the marker all this beautiful creative text with excellent use of language. Now we're pulling it back to the context of it being a diary. Okay. Today, it was the 5th anniversary since the accident. And my dad had a terrible accident. We're not going to kill Dad off. That's a bit cruel. And maybe Dad is doing quite well. We don't want it to be a misery text, but we're drawing a relationship between describing and recounting and narrating these beautiful events that the narrator is remembering about days out with their dad at the beach, and then relating it to a diary entry. I'm not going to do chaos on the beach because that was last year's prompt and we need to move on. Okay, probably our last point is going to be about sentences. Students need to alternate the length and kinds of sentences that they use. So the text is not only easy for the reader to follow. What you don't want is your reader having to stop and read back to make sense of anything that you have created. It's got to flow, okay? We need to craft a variety of sentences and use them strategically. So this is not a process of going, oh, I'm going to put in 2 3-clause sentences followed by a 1-clause sentence followed by 2 3-clause. We're not looking for that sort of formula. We're looking for, across the text, a variety of sentences that show different kinds of sentence types, different stylistic choices of sentences, and particularly varied beginnings within our sentence. Okay, a word or two on vocabulary. We know that kids spend interminable hours learning words, and they're a bit like metaphors. Once we know these extraordinary, exciting, intriguing, unusual 5-syllable words, we're going to stick them in our text because we know them. No, we're not, because vocabulary is never individual words. It's individual words crafted into phrases with the other words around them and then crafted into sentences, because individual words on their own are never going to be what gets you marks. Vocabulary is about using the best possible word in any given situation. So if we think about a dreadful word like looked, let's try not to use that word. It's so year one. Let's change it to glanced or observed or inspected. Yes, but only if that's what makes sense in the phrase, clause, sentence, context that you are using it. Okay? Sometimes simple words are going to be the most effective way to communicate your message. Balanced, of course, with the fact that you can't have all simple words or common or everyday words throughout your entire text. Of course, we need some high-level vocabulary. It's got to be used strategically. Okay, everyone, I can see that we're getting very close to time. Okay, so I'm not going to finish, but I'll just check if possibly, I don't want to end with a no, because I really want to end with a yes, but this is a final reminder. You cannot make mistakes with grammar. You cannot change tense. You cannot have verb and subject agreement errors. Okay, these are the basic techniques, and the grammar that you should have under control is no more than the standard that you would have been already learnt at school. And that's perfectly good grammar that you would need to use in this kind of writing task. So no punctuation errors. And the answer to the question, oh, what if I haven't got any semicolons in my text? Will I lose marks for punctuation? No, you won't. You would only use semicolons if you needed them. Correct punctuation means the punctuation that you need to make your text correctly punctuated, not the inclusion of irrelevant punctuation just because someone's told you. It's a more sophisticated level of punctuation. Okay, everyone, I'm going to take a deep breath. I hope you are as well. And I really hope that was of some value to people. We tried to cram an awful lot in, and I apologize that it was a bit 100 miles an hour. But I really hope it was of some value to you and that you do really well in the writing task. So I'll say goodbye to most people now, excepting for my lovely Saturday students, and I will see you in a couple of days' time. All the best, everyone.